Welcome to Journeys to Becoming a Skydance Animation Artist. This is the 2026 BRIC Summit Talent and Education Day, and we are so grateful to be able to highlight Skydance today and have such amazing artists join us to share with you what it takes to build a career in animation, what happens once you get there. So our Skydance animation artists here, pardon me, will share journeys of into the industry, how they got here, an inside look after landing the job, and exploring the realities of studio work, creative collaboration, and how they continue to grow as artists. So, whether you're just starting out or looking to take the next step, this session offers an honest perspective on navigating a career in animation. And we have some really incredible people here. So, I'm just going to kick it off. You don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from them. So, I will pass it over to Shelby first and enjoy this Skydance webinar.
Okay, let me share screen real quick and then I will full screen it. Okay, hello everybody. I am Shelby Nicholas. I am a storyboard artist at Skydance Animation. So I'm going to quickly walk you through my journey and kind of how I got to my first job at Skydance. So growing up, I always loved to draw, but the problem was I could only draw very realistically. I could kind of copy photos exactly, but I was not very good at drawing from my imagination. And on top of that, I grew up in a very STEM focused family. Everyone in my family, except for me, is an electrical engineer. So I didn't really consider animation as a career until I went online in middle school. And that's when I found DeviantArt and Tumblr. And on those mythical websites, I found a lot of artists who worked in the industry. And slowly through that, I started to be exposed to this whole world. And I learned what a storyboard artist was. And from that moment on, I kind of knew I really would love to do that job. It was kind of like a dream of everything I wanted to do. But the problem was I wasn't quite where I needed to be with art. So based off what all those artists would say, I realized that a lot of them got to where they were, not through talent, but through hard work. So I gave myself a challenge in high school to fill 30 sketchbooks, and if I could get where I needed to be, I could prove it to myself and to my family that I could pursue this for college. So after drawing all of those drawings, even though I was not where I might have needed to be to get into a school like CalArts or anything, my improvement was so much that it gave me the confidence to pursue it going forward, since I knew if I improve that much over the span of X many years, if I continue like that, one day I can get to where I needed to be. So, since I came from such a STEM focused family, it was really important to them that I also went to regular college at the same time. So, I found a niche college program where I was able to go to both art school and college called the Brown RISD Dual Degree Program. And in that program, I studied both illustration and screenwriting. And I learned so much. I did some screenwriting, illustration, character design, comics, lots of different things that really helped me grow and learn so much. But there were no storyboard classes. So when I graduated, I had no storyboard portfolio. And even though I don't regret my decision, since the experience really formed me into who I am today, um, I still had a lot to learn. So all this to say, it's okay if you're not ready after graduation. It's okay if you don't go to art school or even go to college. And it's also okay if you're in a career transition later in life. So the most important thing starting out, it's not your talent, it's not where you went to school, and it's not your insider connections. It's your ability to grow. The discipline to put in the hours needed to improve, openness to feedback and critique, and self-awareness of where you're at so that you can figure out where you need to go. So post grad, I was overwhelmed because I felt like there was still so much I needed to learn about storyboarding. I had never even taken a real storyboard class. So just starting out, there's a difference between TV and feature storyboards. They look different, and what both TV and feature, they look for different things in their artists. On top of that, there's different genres of storyboarding: comedy, action, drama, and each studio has a different voice, and they look for completely different things when hiring. So with so many options, it can be really overwhelming knowing where to even start to begin to learn how to storyboard. So it's really important to be very targeted and intentional when you're creating a portfolio and trying to learn. So post graduation, no storyboard portfolio. What I knew about myself was I really liked shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I could draw semi-realistically. So at the time, and based off my knowledge, I decided to set a clear goal to try to break in as a TV action comedy storyboard revisionist. So because of that, I took a class as my first storyboard class that was very catered to that. And just a caveat, there are many places you can learn how to storyboard if your college, university doesn't offer it, if you don't go to college. So you can take a class at an online school. There's lots of nonprofits like BRIC and many others that offer courses and mentorships. And there's also so many online resources. Just make sure if you are using online resources, they're from somebody who actually works in the industry. So back to that storyboard course, I learned a lot about like what it means to be an actions TV storyboard revisionist. I learned a lot of the basic fundamentals of just storyboarding in general. But I started to realize that after doing so much action and all of that, my favorite part of the entire course were these two drawings where I drew one character getting a little bit emotional. So, because of that, I realized maybe I should make a pivot in what I'm trying to aim for as a storyboard artist. Although I love watching TV action shows, I don't really necessarily enjoy storyboarding it. And I wasn't the strongest storyboard artist in a lot of the classes that were geared towards that. So the more I started to learn about feature animation just through being exposed to the storyboard world, the more I started to fall in love with it. So then I created a new goal and to focus on, which was to break into feature probably through an internship or apprenticeship. So what I did was I started to research a lot of portfolios from studios that got accepted. And rather than just looking at people's portfolios who are industry legends, I really started to look at a lot of portfolios for people who had been recently accepted to internships and to apprenticeships. And through looking at a lot of these portfolios, I was able to notice trends and figure out what were they doing that I wasn't doing in my work. So, based off a lot of that research I did, I realized a lot of these studios like to see a personal story. So, I decided to do a sequence that was about a personal story growing up as a child in a divorced household. So, I made this piece called Playing House. And I think it was a great learning experience. I was headed in the right direction. But at the end of the day, the piece felt a little bit too generic, not genuine. And I was really focused on the time on what I thought the studios wanted to see. So after that, I continued to look through all these portfolios and I noticed a lot of them had really memorable storytelling that made them stand out from other portfolios. So to make bold creative choices. So I kind of went in the opposite direction after that. And I made some very, very bold choices. But at the end of the day, a lot of these sequences were a bit too dark and went so far that they wouldn't be a good fit for the types of studios I was aiming for. So because of that, I decided I needed to continue to take a lot more classes just to keep continuing to learn. So I applied to a WIA mentorship with this incredible feature storyboard artist, Mia Calderon. And then I also took a class at Brainstorm School that was with Stephanie Stein that was much more focused on feature storyboards. So over the course of doing that and doing a lot, I just continued to churn out work. And through just making piece after piece after piece and learning and improving, and I started to realize the things I was good at, the things I was bad at, where my strengths were. And as I started to follow my passion, I started to have a shift in mindset from what work will get me hired to what do I actually want to represent me personally as an artist. And that's when I started to develop my personal voice. And ultimately, while you do need to cater somewhat to studios and figure out what studios are looking for, it's really important to figure out what your personal voice is because studios want people who will do more than just being like if you're Disney, you don't want to just get people who do the Disney thing. They want people with unique voices that will elevate their work from unique perspectives. So, one thing I realized was I had a passion for emotional scenes and nuance acting. People really responded to these things, and I really enjoyed doing them. So, I started to really lean into what my strengths were. And so, you might ask, what is nuance acting? A quick example just to explain it It's when the characters are kind of thinking, showing that through their performance. So, for example, if we see this girl, she sees something scary. She takes some time to process it. She stomachs her fear. And then she looks ahead, musters the strength to go forward. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that was my strength. So after learning what my strengths were, doing so many things, creating so much work, I was finally able to create the portfolio that made me hire, that got me hired. So in total, my storyboard portfolio had 4 pieces, but I honestly mainly got hired based off the first 2. So breaking down what kind of worked in those pieces, a lot of them had a simple fantasy element. It wasn't overly complicated, but at the same time, it really took advantage of the imaginative elements of animation. There was a lot of specific moments and memorable imagery in it, and at the end of the day, it was really focused on a character and what they wanted. So from the start of the sequence, like we're seeing these dancers, and then you rack focus through a mirror to see a little girl who says, "It looks like they're flying." So from the very beginning, we kind of know what the character wants and we can root for them. And over the course of the sequence, we were really focused on a character relationship between a mother and a daughter and how that relationship changed. So really locking into those fundamental human things. So then in my other piece that people really responded to, it was actually a redo of the personal story about growing up as a child in divorce. But I'm going to kind of break down why this piece worked a little better. And that's because it was focused a lot more on the child's unique point of view and her perspective. There was a lot more imaginative elements that took advantage of animation, like before, with like a drawing coming to life, memorable imagery, and then also a lot more specific humor and performance, really leaning in to like how a child would actually behave. And at the end of the day, I think the reason why the sequence worked was I was much more vulnerable with my own experience, and I wasn't focused on what a studio wanted, but creating an emotional truth. And at the core, again, it was about a relationship. So just a reminder, everyone's journey looks different. I used my specific voice and targeted what my strengths were, which was emotional storyboarding, towards the area I fit best. But people with different strengths and expertise will have different portfolios, and your portfolio may be completely different than mine, but just as successful. Don't forget your personal voice is worth sharing, and be truthful and specific in your stories, and it will resonate, whether it's emotion or comedy. And just keep going because progress takes time. And at the end of the day, even if you don't have confidence in your current ability, have confidence in your ability to improve. So thank you. I will pass it on to the next person.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing, Shelby. Um, Gosh. Okay, sorry. Let me share. I'm impressed by how much you were able to pack into like 10 minutes and I'm glad because stuff I couldn't include in mine. Okay, cool. Get my notes. All right. Well, hey everyone. Yeah, so I'm Rayven Van Kalker, also a story artist at Skydance, and gonna go into a portion of my journey talk. Uh, but yeah, I also wanted to say I have a lot of screenshots in here of resources, and I'm gonna click by them really quickly. But don't worry, I do have a version of this talk available online that you can have. So please don't feel pressure to take notes or anything, and just enjoy. Um, so yeah, let's see. All right, need to hide something real quick. Okay, cool. Um, so yeah, we're gonna sit on this slide for a second. So yeah, about me. We all go through arcs in our lives, and for me, I feel like a good starting place for mine to talk about is like when I was completely lost as a person, which was in college. I come from one of those families where you have to either become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, and I basically landed on a path towards a chemistry degree. And I specifically really liked organic chemistry, and I was fortunate enough to be awarded a scholarship to do research. And I was like making antibiotics starting my sophomore year. And I knew research was important work, like I knew that. But at the same time, I was slowly coming to the realization that I was more of an artistic creative at heart. And when creatives aren't able to, express themselves, we suffer. Thankfully, I really think serendipity and trusting my gut instincts played a huge role in leading me to where I am today. in the same building as the chemistry department, there was this tiny new department called New Media. It was like literally two classrooms. But it was the idea of combining technology and art, and I thought that was super exciting. And I was already doing digital art like this on the side. So without telling my parents, I secretly added on a second major my sophomore year. I still graduated in 4 years, but basically, anyway, like fast forward towards graduation, like I'm wrapping up my thesis, and art is still very much on the back burner. I'm touring grad schools for chemistry. I'm applying to places. It's a hustle. And then I finally graduate and I step out of the world of academia very briefly. And I took a breath and I realized I was like speeding down this path I didn't want to be on anymore. Um, and I knew, like, deep down, I wanted to tell stories in some way, but I didn't really know where I fit in, whether that was like writing or drawing or anything. I really didn't know. But I learned more about animation through my new media degree. And I thought it was an amazing art form to like tell stories with. So for fun, I went on the Disney animation career site just to see like what kind of jobs they had. And there was one that like caught my eye because it had the word story in the job description. So I clicked it and I read the description for what a story artist is, and I was ecstatic. Like it literally felt like this moment. I'm a visual thinker. I want to read scripts and draw what I visualize. I want to work collaboratively. I want to make an impact by telling stories. And so, like, from there, I was sold. Like, this is what I wanted to do. The only problem was that my mom still had this big, beautiful dream of her only child becoming a doctor. And anyone who's been in that same situation knows it's kind of hard to navigate that. But after a lot of effort, I basically made a contract with her on paper. And I even signed it. And I said, I have 2 years to land a full-time job in animation. And if I couldn't do it, I would drop it all and go to grad school. For reference, this is what my figure drawings looked like at that time. And exactly 2 years later, I did start the story internship at Pixar, and I started talking with Skydance about a job opportunity the same year later. So, how did I do that? Learning how to storyboard. I really considered myself at ground zero. Like, I mean, I just graduated and I decided I wanted to do something I knew nothing about. I had to start by learning what I even needed to learn. And the Google search went something like this, where I found these the main topics I have to learn, but those topics have subtopics which have their own subtopics. And it was just kind of overwhelming. So, like, where do you start? In the beginning, I was just a sponge. You just have to be a sponge. There are so many resources out there at our disposal through the internet. There's books on story theory, cinematography, YouTube channels dedicated to video essays on film. There's content like with insightful information generously created and piled together by industry professionals. There's podcasts to hear from people's experiences, and of course, movies, not just animated films, but live action films, foreign films, black and white films. So I had all these like resources and materials to understand film and story structure and a lot of personal experience to learn from. But at the time, like I said, I considered myself at ground zero. I knew, like, even on a personal level, there was something in me that said this is what I was meant to do, but I still didn't even know what kinds of stories I wanted to tell. So in the meantime, while I was slowly making my way through that big library of resources, I was slowly learning how to draw. And I basically did this. I made a syllabus for myself to follow and just kind of learn topics week by week. But really, what made the difference was having an eye for what needs to be refined. Because I didn't have anyone to get feedback from, I think a huge part about being self-taught for me was learning to recognize when my work wasn't working. And we have terms, like pencil mileage and sayings like, beat the bad drawings out, which are true. There's truth to them, but I didn't fill out 100 sketchbooks. If I did a drawing and it didn't come out right at all, I was just trying to be very brutally honest with myself, and I tried to figure out where I went wrong. Like, why wasn't this appealing or clear? Often it wasn't clear because I wasn't drawing with intention. And if I can't draw with intention, it means I don't know enough to have the confidence to put down the line. So I had to refer back to foundations and practice and experiment some more. I was just trying to be like more thoughtful instead of aimlessly putting down pencil mileage and repeating the same mistakes. And this is just an example of the kind of progress I was able to make in 6 months by self-analyzing and developing more line confidence by practice. Um, I also want to mention like it's easy to kind of fall into a practice of trying to chase perfectionism, but don't hold yourself back by trying to do that. Also, learning gesture through this process was such a blessing because I learned my goal is to always imbue life into a drawing, and it's okay if it's not a perfect drawing as long as it captures the feeling that I'm going for. Um, so yeah, so this is all 2019. I graduated in May and I started this whole thing. I was working super hard. I was excited. I was studying and doing all that drawing. I finally made my first story sequences. The only money I spent that year was to go to animation conferences, Lightbox and CTN, which was so worth it. I got super lucky and I met wonderful people that gave me motivation to keep going. I brought one of my first sequences to Lightbox to get it reviewed. And basically all the feedback I got was that I still need to learn drawing in general. So I went back home and I focused on draftsmanship. And then CTN was a couple months later in November. So I came back to LA with a new sequence and I showed it around again. And all the feedback I got from that was to work on composition. So I was getting things reviewed and I was being receptive to like feedback and I felt like I was moving up. But then 2020 comes around and I uh, I did apply to a few places. Pandemic hits. I got rejections from everywhere. And I don't know, I felt like I was at a loss. Like I didn't really know what was wrong. And to be honest, like I didn't make any new personal work for most of that year, even though I still had this like ticking clock of like the 2 year contract in the background. And I can delve into this if anyone wants to know more about how I navigated that time. But basically, I got to a point where I realized I had been so focused on making my portfolio better and better and trying to make work that I thought people wanted to see from me that I lost track of myself. And especially when my voice needed developing. And yeah, thank you, Shelby, for like kind of naming some of these. But what really, really helped me out of that block was discovering these words and gaining a really good understanding of them in the context of our industry and animation. I like maybe as a panel in a few minutes we can deconstruct them even further. But so yeah, specificity, nuance, authenticity, and having your own like discovering your own voice. And it was once I took a beat and I understood those words and applied them to one more sequence. I did this in the beginning of 2021. Um, it's still on my website called Teo. It really elevated me in order to create uh, something special, I think. And it was really the only one sequence that was different, and I think it lifted me up to be recognized by Pixar and later by Skydance. Um, but yeah, I think not like to just close. I learned to be patient with myself and what I had to learn, and I think I invested in myself, and the world met me halfway, and I feel so lucky. So yeah, thanks. Next is Victor.
Oh my God. I don't even know where to start, honestly, when I'm making this up because I was I've been doing this for a while and but you guys will have to bear with me because my journey was very different from because I started from Brazil. So anyway, I'm gonna give you all the context. So just bear with me. Let me start presenting. 1 second. Uh, from 1 second. Uh, okay. Where are my notes? There you go. Oops. Anyway, okay. So my name is Victor Sampaio. I'm a story artist at Skydance Animation with all these amazing people here. And I live in Los Angeles, but I'm like I said, I'm originally from a little town near the Amazon forest in Brazil. And I've been working in the animation industry since 2011, 12. It's been like 14 years. And like most of you here probably grew up like loving drawing as a kid. So here's like a few photos of me as a little baby. And then this is me like 6 year old showing my very proud of my drawing of this dolphin. Anyway, so like most of you, I liked to draw as a kid, and I was very lucky that my family supported me a lot since like a little kid. Like I never forgot when my dad was talking to me, and he was telling me how he never had the chance to really find why he loved work because he just had to work from a really young age. Like he couldn't really go to like a university or anything like that. So he just had to find a job, provide for his family. So they wanted to make sure with my turn, I would have the chance to do what I love. So again, a little context to Brazil around 2011, what was going on in the animation industry. Basically, there was not much. It was basically ads and a little like cartoon TVs here and there. So at that time, the government came up with this new law that was basically made to boost the TV and film industry. And that law basically says like for example, let's say if Cartoon Network or Disney, they wanted to have their shows playing Brazilian TVs, around 15% of that content needed to be produced locally by companies in Brazil. And that came out of kind of nowhere, and we didn't have enough studios to, accommodate that much work. So small little studios popped up left and right, and they had to find people. So at that time, actually when I was starting, if you knew how to hold a pencil, you would get a job. It was kind of that easy. Um, so in the meantime, what that was happening, I was 17 and I was trying to learn animation. I recently moved out of like north of Brazil. I moved to a big city called São Paulo, and then I was trying to find a way to learn animation. And then at the time, again, since there wasn't any animation industry, there was also no like an animation degree that you could take. Basically, you could find like small little like programs, very specific. But I also found this animation like it was like a technical school. They had like the very basics of like writing, design, animation. It was like everything was so cramped, so basic and fast, but it was enough to to know the possibilities you have, and you can kind of from that find what you like. So I applied to that. I got in, and then but quickly I learned I was like, okay, this is not going to be enough. I also need to learn by myself and keep studying. The problem was there's not a lot of animation books translated to Portuguese, at least not at the time. So it was really hard to find material, at least for me. But I was lucky I could find like, for example, like the animation survival kit. There was a copy in Portuguese. So I got that and I started like just going through everything and just drawing over and over and trying to animate everything. And during my first year at that techno animation, my 2D animation, because I guess because I was working on myself on the side and learning to do animation, my 2D animation teacher actually hired me. I guess he saw some potential there. And because they had to create stuff for the because of that new law, they hired me part-time to work in that studio. And again, more context for how things were worked. Back in Brazil, the studios were very small, like I said. So when you got in, you nothing was really specialized. Like you kind of had to do everything and you learn on the job. Like everyone's wearing his like all the hats at the same time. Like so it was hard, but also I had the chance to learn on the job many things. Like I was doing 2D animation, I was designing props, I did layouts, I even did like rigs for Toon Harmony, and I was learning as I did it. And then I did a little bit of storyboards, but then I had to edit my own storyboards. So I was learning how to edit. I'm putting like sounds and putting like VFX and everything on the go. And that was kind of a blessing in disguise for me because working as a story artist, you kind of have to know a little bit of everything, especially if you want to, direct one day. Um, and then at some point, this is a show that actually came out recently, but I had the opportunity to. They needed someone to do boards. They're like, Victor, you like animating. like give it a try in this thing. So they had to come up with a pilot of a show called Weeboon, and it was my first time doing an animatic. And I did this pilot. I helped the studio, and it was my first time actually finishing like boards and animating the whole thing. It was more of an animation at this point because I didn't really know what I was doing. Like no one really knew what they were doing. But it felt like I found like I figured out what I liked. I was like, this is fun. I loved drawing so much. I loved character design and I loved animating and it's storytelling. I was like, okay, storyboarding is kind of like everything like together. And then even my director at the time, he mentioned like, hey, this is like pretty good. I think you should specialize and do only this. So I went ahead and followed his advice, and then from that day, I was like, I'm just studying storyboards. But again, I didn't know where to start, so I started watching a bunch of films, and I would do this is from like 10 years ago. I started like watching a bunch of films, and I would do these little GIFs of shots, and when I was studying like blocking, so I was studying like Touch of Evil, one of like my favorite films, and then Spielberg, obviously, always paying attention to like blocking, composition and I will do that. And then I had this Tumblr, and I would just put like every day. I would do this like once a day, and then post on Tumblr every day. It's kind of like a way to share my progress. I was learning, and it was I like again. I didn't have anyone telling me what a storyboard portfolio looked like. I didn't even think of it at the time. So I just started sharing all of this, and I kept going. So I was like, at the time, I was watching House of Cards, so I was like basically copying everything and learning the blocking and I wasn't doing this to get a job. I was just like I just to get better at the thing I was already doing. So for example, I was also very inspired by photography. I would get like a photo and come up with like beats, like a little quick idea based on the photo. Again, I was sometimes in my head, I would just come up with a shot. I'm like, oh, what if I wanted to put the camera and play with like the reflections? Like we have this character I'm shooting through the glass. I don't know. Anyway, I was like experimenting. It was like fun. I wish I still did that. And then again, I started looking, maybe I need to learn more action. I had this friend who was a character designer. He posted this character as like a little kid and a guy flying on this ship. And then I was like, oh my God, I want to make like a few shots of using his character. So I started post online like one by one. Like every night after work, I would sit down and work on this thing and like GIF by GIF, and I would share it like on Facebook and Tumblr. And like the next day, I share the continuation, and people kind of like my friends would be like waiting for the next one. I was like, oh, I can't wait to see what you're gonna post tomorrow. And then like again, next day, one more. I was barely sleeping. I was basically doing this until like 3 in the morning and then going to work next day. And then I kept doing that for like 3 years. I stayed working in the like industry in Brazil, working on TV shows and shorts, kept sharing my gifts online. And then I started to venture like outside a little bit. I remember I emailed this small independent studio in Spain called Headless, which I was like a big fan of. And I told them I really love their work and then I would love to work with them one day. And sadly, they never emailed me back. But then a couple of months, I received an email from a studio in the US called Real Effects, uh, asking if I was interested in this to interview for this job. And I was like, what the heck? Like, I never applied for, I don't even know what Real Effects was. Turns out the guys from Spain actually did saw my email and they were working at Real Effects and I guess they still remember my name and then they saw the things I've been putting online and they decided to give me a shot for a storyboard test because again I didn't have a portfolio so they're like okay this guy would needs a little test to see if he can join as a beginner. So but I was so happy though this is the film that they invited me for, so this is 2015 at this point. It was called Wish Police, and I was so freaking happy. Like I couldn't wait for my test. Like they started to take a long time to email me back, being like, "Here's the test you have to do." So I was like, "I'm just gonna do it myself." So like every day again, overnight, I came up with this little story, which unfortunately I don't have anymore because it's been a long time. I wish I could share, but I came up with a little tiny story. It was like a mini portfolio, and then I sent an email to them, being like, "Hey, I know you guys are, I know, busy. Still, while I was waiting for my test, I did this." And they're like, "Oh, this is great. Okay, yeah, I think you can work with us." So I enjoyed the studio, and that was just like one little problem after this is that I could barely speak any English at the time, and now I'm suddenly working for an American studio. And on top of that, I didn't know that you're supposed to pitch your sequences because no one was doing that in Brazil. We kind of just like, I don't know. And I was like, okay, how do I learn this? So in the meantime, uh, I started searching online, went in YouTube on YouTube. I was watching videos of like Joe Ranft and Eric Goldberg pitching. They're like masters of like entertaining people and telling and pitching and telling the story. Uh, and then in the meantime, I was trying to learn English and try and I had my first sequence on the job. I had to kind of pretend I was understanding what they're asking me because I remember recording the meetings and they would be like, "Oh, are you okay? You have all the information you need to for your launch?" And I was like, "Yes, yeah, of course, yeah, yeah." And then later I would watch the meeting, translate the words, and I was like, "Oh shit, I actually don't. Sorry, I actually don't understand what I had to do." So I kept, watching the videos, learning how to pitch, and then I decided that my boards would have to be so clear. And I was like overboarding so much. I don't recommend doing that, but I was doing that at the time because I didn't have to say anything, when I showed the board, so I could, talk as little as possible. And that kind of worked for a little bit. Like I worked on this film for like a year and a half. I at least I was able to like buy time in the beginning. So I was like, okay, I know a few more words. I'm not as nervous as I'm like pitching. But then after like a year and a half, unfortunately, the movie died. And but still, I didn't know at the time, but this film, Wish Police, would literally change my life and actually bring me to Skydance a few years later. But we'll go back to it later. After that, I was like, after this 1 year and a half, I was like, okay, I kind of know enough of English. I feel like I can explore and do more things and open up my, send my portfolio around to other countries. And one story artist that I worked with at Real Effects, who actually works at Skydance now too, really liked my work, and we became friends. And then he heard about this studio. He lives in Canada, and then he heard that they needed people, and they recommended me. And I was like, wow, like this is like I don't even know. People animation is just very nice. I learned that. Um, and it was also very nice to finally have someone to help me, like I didn't know how to negotiate contracts. I had no idea uh what they needed, what kind of software they were using. So it was really nice to have someone with me helping me out. And then I was initially working remotely, and then the studio, like you can see in this photo, this is this is my coworkers, and they made this thing with this hoodie. And if you can see my head here, I was this phone. So they would walk me around in the office during pitches. So that's how I pitched my sequence. They would have this thing. It was really funny. So this is Tom and Candice. Like they're extremely talented. But anyway, eventually I moved to Canada, and I was there working on this show for Amazon Prime at the time. It's a Kung Fu Panda Paws of Destiny. It was super cool. I learned so much, especially from action. I was watching Kung Fu fighting choreographs every day for months. I felt like I could fight Kung Fu at the end of this project. I don't, but it was really cool. I learned a lot. After that, working because it was a TV show, it was still fun and but I decided I wanted to go back to feature because I really loved my experience working in Wish Police. Like just it's different. Like you get more time to think about your short choices and to really figure out your sequence. So I decided to become a full-time freelancer, which was very scary. But again, I gathered a little bit more experience with the friends I made. They like helped me out to negotiate things, and also at this time, COVID was kind of starting, and companies were a little more open to hire people from, to work remotely. So it was terrible, but also an opportunity, depending on how you see it. So I started applying everywhere, and then again kept sharing my work online. And then a head of story of this company called Locksmith found my Tumblr again. Tumblr is the best. I don't know today, but back in the day, it was really good. They found out my work there, and they reached out about this feature that they're putting a crew together, and they really wanted to interview me, and I met with them and joined the team. And this is like a quick drawing that I did after meeting the directors. So this is JP on the left and Octavio. Uh, Octavio was one of the like head of stories on Spider-Verse. But at the time, like I met them, I was just so impressed of how like excited and happy they were doing like just storyboarding together and brainstorming together and giving notes. So I did this drawing because I wanted to make this moment like eternal, and so they will remember. Because I knew after a couple of years that with the stress of making a film, like you don't laugh as much in the end. And they're both Pixar alumni. Octavio, the guy on the hat, he used to be a mentor at Pixar. He would mentor like the new people. And when I heard about that, I was still like working remote. I was like, oh man, oh, that's can you give me some feedback? So I kept like bugging him to, I wanted to keep improving and improving my skills. And then he was incredibly nice. Like, I mean, he can tell when you really like when a person like you really want to learn and when you're pushing yourself. So he would take like his free time on like weekends, like it was usually Sunday, and we have a call, and he would give me assignments, and then we would do it during the week after work, like after work hours, and then we would meet on Sunday again, and then I would show my stuff, and I was like, oh, I did this, I've been studying this, and he was really pushing me to bring more of my personal stories into the project I'm in. Like he would give a bunch of examples, like that we can get later during the Q&A. Like, but you would talk about everything at Pixar, and it really like opened up my mind at the time. This is just a quick shout out of my team. Like we were working remotely with like a bunch of legends. So you might know some of them. Everyone during COVID, anyway. And then after, sorry, there's a blank blank panel. But after that, I don't even know how I got this job after I finished Ron's Gone Wrong. But I got a call from Shadow Machine, and they tell me they're crewing up for an adaptation of Pinocchio with Guillermo del Toro. And I was like, what the hell? Like shaking on the phone. I don't even remember. Like I think they mentioned how they found me, but I was just so overwhelmed in the call that I was just like, yes, let's go. um, and it was the best time. Like I met my head of story, Vera, Mark, and Del Toro, and then it was just incredible. It was a short one. I only worked with it on it for like 6 months. It was a low budget film, and they were trying to finish this through COVID, which is very hard with a stop motion film. This is like some of the boards I did. It came out on Netflix, and we ended up like winning. It was a crazy like I worked 6 months, and suddenly I had a film that won everything. Like we won the BAFTA, the Academy Award. I was like, whoa. Yeah, I literally I don't know how this happened, honestly. I so I was like, okay, this is incredible. And again, if you pay attention to the photo I shared before, they have pictures of the people that work remotely, and it took me like half an hour to find myself, but I'm like here in the corner. uh anyway, after Pinocchio, I thought, okay, like after the awards, like things that's how I'm gonna like kind of sell myself to get my next job. I'm still a freelancer. But then I had this like sometimes you get a job the most in the most unexpected way. Like you remember this caricature I showed before. So the directors really freaking liked this drawing. They even show this when they were showing the film in NSC. They had this picture like blew up like behind them. So they posted this on Instagram, and then a few of other ex like Pixar people that founded the studio called Cuckoo Studios. They saw the image, and they asked who that was, like who did this, and I guess they talked about me, and suddenly I had a job interview, and I was like, what is happening? At this point, I just things were just happening so fast, and I was like, I was not even applying for jobs anymore. And then I had the interview, and I worked on this film called Inner Dreams, which it just came out actually last year on Netflix. And again, I feel like as if it's almost like I kind of worked at Pixar, because everyone that left Pixar, they started founding like this new studios like Locksmith and then Cuckoo, and then I got to work with these people that have like 20 plus years of experience and learned so much. I was learning with Alex Wood, who some people might know from his life drawing classes, and then Max Brace, who was at Pixar for like 20 plus years. And it was like the best time. I like felt like I was doing my best work while working with them. And a fun fact, I actually met my wife when I was working in this film. But anyway, again, a little look at us going through COVID. This is we're doing Christmas. We got together to build like gingerbread houses. I didn't have gingerbread house in Brazil. It's not a thing we do, so I just watched people doing it. I tried cooking it. It didn't work. Anyway, after Cuckoo, I was like, okay, maybe that's it's a joke, but that's the secret. I did a caricature, I got a job. Maybe I should start doing caricatures of everyone, every people that I work with. So I did, I did a caricature of the directors of In Your Dreams. I did Alex, Max, and Stelling, but it didn't work. That's because that's not how it works, right? You student need to apply and show your job. But then out of nowhere, again, like remember, like I said, Wish Police like changed my life. 7 or so years later, the same directors that were directing this film, they were now at the time working at Skydance. So Victor, this is Alfredo on the left, and then Victor Maldonado. They're working at Skydance, and they still remember me from the work I did a long time ago. This is the thing with this industry. Like once you get in, and everyone is super nice, and you start building this connections with people. And I love to always be super close with my directors, my team, and my heads of story. Like I would check in with them all the time. I really like I cannot pitch a sequence to a director without checking with the head of story like a million times. Like I feel like uh it's like you really need the support of everybody. It's like a team effort. So they remember me, and they even joked when we met. They're like, "Wow, 7 years later, you can actually speak English now. We can actually talk." Anyway, they pitched a new film to me, and I love the idea. I remember getting emotional when they pitched it. I was like, "Yes, I will absolutely join this film." And here it was. I started working for Skydance still remotely initially, and then after a couple of months, the studio makes an offer for me to move to Los Angeles. So I packed my bags and I moved out of Brazil again for a second time. It was like a picture of me crying, saying goodbye to my sister. Uh, uh I can't look at this picture. Um, and then now here I am working with the best, the coolest people in the world, and I couldn't be more thankful. And oh my God, that picture hit me. I shouldn't put them in there. And yeah, that's kind of been the journey. It's kind of crazy. It's been 14 years and it's like this all over the place. I don't even know how I can help people like with my story, but anyway, that's what it is. Thank you. How do I stop? Okay, sorry.
It is so cool this is my first panel ever as a professional, and it's so cool that I get to do it with all like my coworkers who are also my friends. And like, I feel like I know all of you, but I've also learned so much more today. So I will be, I guess, the bridge from story to art now. Let me just get this all set up. Great. So, hi, I'm Kalina Murat. I'm a visual development artist, so that means I'm doing concept art for 3D, TV, and feature animated film. This is my journey into animation. A little bit about me. I'm first generation Polish American, and I grew up in Wheeling, Illinois, so near Chicago. And I was always the everything kid growing up. So my attention was always split between sports and the arts, orchestra, Girl Scouts, volunteering, honors AP classes. And at 18, I made the jump to San Francisco, where I studied visual development as a BFA at Academy of Art University. And flashing forward to 2019, I moved to Los Angeles. So I think I'm finally officially a California girly. I've been here in California for almost 13 years. And I'm here with my pup, Greta Gerwag. And I've been in the animation industry for a little over 5 years as a generalist phys dev artist. And I never knew growing up that animation was a job that I could do. Art was always around me. I was always taking art classes, but I knew that I absolutely loved animation. I grew up with Blockbuster around the corner, RIP Blockbuster. And my dad would bring home movies like the Studio Ghibli films, kind of by accident, not even really knowing what they are. And all of these major films that would later really influence me. You probably recognize a lot of the Ghibli, DreamWorks, and the Disney films, but the two you probably don't recognize in the lower left-hand corner. It's two Polish cartoons from the 70s my parents grew up with called Reksha and Bolek i Lolek. So I was having influences from all over the world. And while there's so many modern day artists and concept artists that I'm looking up to right now, I always come back to these art influences. For pattern work, I'm always looking at Alphonse Mucha and Joseph Domjan or Domjan. For color, shapes, and general feeling, I'm looking at Monet, generally Impressionism, and Mary Blair. And for storytelling, I tend to look at Norman Rockwell for these mundane, kind of quiet moments that he makes exciting, and Hayao Miyazaki for his imaginative and otherworldly concepts. And so my first love will always be folk art and pattern work. I love everything handmade and all the imperfections. I look at everything from William and Morris pattern work to embroidery, hand painted tiles, stained glass. And this really plays into my career. It's like a love that I always had throughout my life, but I didn't really realize it until my first few years of working in animation that this is kind of like my thing. I feel so often when you're graduating school or entering the industry, you're asked like, what's your thing? What's your specialty? And I liked a little bit of everything. And so I realized down the road that this is my calling card. And I think it comes from my Polish heritage and folk art that I grew up with. And so these are the early days. This is me, probably 6 years old. Art was always in my life. My parents were always really encouraging, but I didn't know that art was something I could pursue. But I was, again, always taking art classes. And so my parents are immigrants from Poland. They also work in the medical field as physical therapists, and all of our family friends were physical therapists growing up. So they were like, do you want to do something medical? Like, do you want to be a radiologist? You're really good at color. You're really good at like differentiating value. Do you want to be a physical therapist just like us? Anything medical? And I was just so unsure. I was so overwhelmed. Like, would I be a medical illustrator? Would I be an interior designer? I didn't really know. Until eighth grade, I tore my ACL and my meniscus. And I was basically on the couch all summer from the transition from middle school to high school, which absolutely sucked. And because I was so sick on the pain meds, I couldn't watch TV and all my favorite animated shows until my dad realized, like, oh, I could probably read some books. And he brought me the first art of book I ever got, which I was pretty sure is this Tangled art book. And as I was looking through the book, it dawned on me, like, people make movies for a living. I don't know why it didn't click up until this point that people were making the things that we saw every day on TV and at the theater. So, and because once was not enough, my junior year of high school, I tore my ACL again. Um, so I had to kind of pivot and really think about my future. I basically retired from sports. I no longer played softball and volleyball. I focused on all my classes, including art and orchestra. And I started digging around and I found out that there was this pre-college camp. Well, they called it a camp. It wasn't really. It was like kind of a few weeks away at Academy of Art University, where you essentially got to kind of play out a program and take a few classes, about 4 classes. And so I made a deal with my parents because I realized they had a visual development program. And they said if I got all A's, that they would support me in going to art school. Surprise, I did get all A's. It was really exciting. I did get to go to art school and I was really appreciative of their like emotional support and helping me a little bit financially. This is a lot of my college work, the foundation work. Um, it was really difficult because I didn't know anyone in California. All my family was in Poland or in Illinois. And so I essentially was starting over every time I moved. At the time, Academy of Art University was the only accredited degree, full accredited degree for Viz Dev, which was really important to my parents. Again, being immigrants and not knowing how the system worked in the United States, to them, it didn't matter about the portfolio or like the art side of it. To them, it was so important. So I went to school. Um, I ended up graduating in 5 years and I moved to LA without a job. And here is kind of where some pieces I had in my portfolio as I graduated. On the left-hand side is a photo of me at Industry Day at our school. We had something called the Spring Show, and I finally made one piece into it. But I didn't have any job interests. Like I talked with some recruiters, I had some portfolio reviews, and nothing really came of it. And so I moved to LA December 2019, and surprise, COVID. Um, the world shuts down. I'm kind of working odd jobs to stay afloat. I was an administrative assistant for this car company. So I was essentially helping people order giant car lifts for like car mechanics and selling like AC replenishers. I was in charge of tracking like giant trucks, like the Saya trucks that you see on the freeway. And eventually I went back to Nordstrom, which I worked for a little bit in college as well. And I was just constantly working on my portfolio, trying to keep an eye out for any kind of opportunities. And so I had a lot of rejections and a lot of almosts. I applied to tons of programs. And like kind of the turning point was I was a Netflix trainee finalist twice, which was so exciting. But it was so difficult at the same time because I got the email and then they said they weren't able to place me despite making it all the way through. And so I ran across during COVID, I'm scrolling on Instagram, a post by Emile Cole at Lear, and I had no idea what it was. And it honestly looked kind of like a scam post. Like, who's giving away free schooling, this free program? It sounded too good to be true. And in the time of COVID, I feel like there were just like this meme scams everywhere. So unfortunately, ECA no longer exists, but I did make it into the program. I was one of 10 students, and it was a 4 month long program where I received a background design certificate. And ultimately, this is the program that changed my life. And so I'm going to say right now, I've never formally interviewed for an animation position. You're probably like, Kalina, that doesn't make any sense. How are you working in the field and you've never had a formal interview? Well, this is to say you never know how you're going to find work in animation. And if you don't learn it from all of us here as panelists, the more you ask around, you'll realize there's no one way to get to the same spot as your other colleagues. And it can come from the most unexpected connection, program, or first gig that you get. I was also told that I probably only ever really work TV based on my portfolio and that I might not ever work in feature because of how I drew. And I ended up in feature from the get-go. So my interview essentially was not a formal sit-down interview with a recruiter or a team, but really it was doing this 4 month accredited program, which connected me with Skydance Animation, who offered me an internship 2 years out of college, which for me was unheard of. I'd never gotten an internship over at school during my time there. And so I ended up doing this internship, which they called the Artist Development Mentee Program. I worked with Sean Jimenez and Armand Serrano, who were my mentors, and we chose a fairy tale or story to develop and add a plot twist to, and we would do a whole pitch deck. And so I chose to do a Polish version of Baba Yaga, which is usually depicted in Russian culture. And so I feel like I ended up with a lot of great portfolio pieces out of it. I understood the inner workings of a studio, like when they're thinking about pitching a film, and all of kind of the back end things that you don't see always as an artist unless you're working in the development department or on the pitch. And from the internship a month later, I was offered an apprenticeship 6 months in. I'm Skydance's first official, unofficial apprenticeship. I was mentored by Lizzie Nichols for 3 months on Swapped, which comes out later this year, and 3 months on Wandala with my mentor, Michelle Graybeal. And essentially, again, I didn't interview, but my interview was working as this apprenticeship, and I was then offered a full-time gig. And I continued to work on Wandala through all 3 seasons. And so now I'm a full-time visual development artist. As a generalist, I do basically anything but character design. I'm a jack of all trades, but a master of none. And so I do everything from environments, props, FX explorations, costume design, color work, texture paint, technical call outs, and sometimes even draw overs and paint overs when my art directors and production designers trust me. And so there's three kind of stages to every project, I would say. There's early project days, where as a biz dev artist, you're doing blue sky explorations and kind of, the world's your oyster and the pacing's a little bit shorter or a little bit more open. when your project is greenlit, you really start to sit down and you're pitching a lot of ideas and iterations of your assignments. You're tying down the show style and you're developing major assets. And then there's the last part where you're sprinting for your life, wrapping up a film. You're trying to do all the final designs, pack it, and catch all of the miscellaneous things that have fallen through the cracks. The most exciting thing in my career that's happened lately is I got to be printed in the Wandala Art of book, which was a major career milestone for me. And so from there, every time I kind of hit the next peak, I'm like, what do I want to do next? And some of that happens when I'm focusing on my personal work. So I do a little bit of personal work, but when I do finish up work, I try to get away from the computer screen. I do DIY crafty hobbies, I exercise, I travel. I try to participate in art challenges online, like playing Air Pro. I take classes with Warrior Art Paint online. And then I also do some freelance and independent short film projects. So I've gotten to be an art director for an animated short credit sequence. I've done some art for a live action short, and I'm currently a production designer on a 2D animated short. And with my goal now being to be a production designer for feature animated film, I'm kind of taking little pieces of all these experiences to kind of build all of my hard and soft skills to hopefully get there one day. And most importantly, mentorship has had such a major impact on my life. It literally changed my life going from ECA over to Skydance, having all those people hold my hand and teach me the ropes. I've gotten to work with all of my mentors in a formal capacity now, which has been really amazing. And so I try to give back as well. So I've also been a mentor for four different individuals for Better Youth. I got to be the Skydance Animation VisDev Apprentice Mentor for 2025, and I'm so happy that I currently get to work with my mentee on my current project. And we hope to continue to build the program, and I hope to be part of it again one day. And then I'm also volunteering as a shop steward for the union. So there's an animation union over Los Angeles, and so every animation studio has a volunteer or two. Um, and yeah, and it's one of my favorite parts of working in animation. It's the people. I've made incredible friends, mentors, and connections. So thanks for having me. And off to Devonn.
It's amazing. Oh my God, all my coworkers are so inspiring, and I have to follow up, but I love them for that. Let me share screen.
Devonn, you're incredible. Don't worry.
I'm so excited for this.
Thank you. It's just blank, but should be able to see it now. Okay.
Yep.
So hello everyone. I'm glad to be joining today. My name is Devonn, and I'm a character designer at Skydance Animation. Like my colleagues, I would like to kind of share with you a quick overview of my journey as an artist. I really wish I had some of my very first drawings and crafts from when I was little, but I do remember a story of like an early instance of creating a character. My mom likes to tell a story about an art project my brother and I did when we were very little, probably like kindergarten. The assignment was to make ourselves using a little cutout of a person and all our markers and crayons. So when we come home at the end of the day with our little versions of ourselves, my mom was like very amused by what we came up with. She noticed that I made a very accurate interpretation of myself. You know, I had like all the things that make up a person. I gave myself eyes and my nose, my hair, the clothes I was wearing that day. I also colored it very accurately, even down to my skin tone. She likes to make that note every time. Um, but my brother had other ideas about what he looked like. And we're twins, mind you, fraternal, but you know, I love to see the contrast between those two things. And oh, I should ask my mom if she even has these things anymore. But remembering the story, it got me thinking about how I would go on to branch out and continue to make art based on both my own perceptions and that of the creatives around me, including my brother, whose instinct was to do something very different and unique and thinking outside of the box. So love him for that. Um, and because that I was remembering all the things that influenced me growing up. Music is and was a huge part of all of that. You know, growing up in a household where my parents were playing music all the time. It was hip hop, R&B, Motown. So I always loved the kind of merging of visual art and music. Um, One of my favorite movies growing up was Fantasia 2000, and it was just like so eye-opening for me. That was one of my very first animated films, and having that in combination with a rhythm was so unique to me. And those two pieces at the bottom are by a family friend, and he's a muralist and character artist from St. Louis named Kababi Bayek, and his work was huge inspiration for me. And I got a chance to sort of talk with him and show him my work, and we've had great conversations together. And of course, animation held a special place in my heart, having grown up with a minimal number of TV channels and a ton of VHS tapes. These are just a few of my favorite shows and studios. If you know, like the cartoon lover to anime pipeline is very real, and we love Toonami for bringing anime to the West for us. My old sketchbooks were filled with horrible fan art done in graphite that I'm honestly glad are lost to time. I don't know where those things are, and I don't want to go searching for them. So, but that didn't stop me because I found a way to start making digital art early by drawing on my Nintendo DS on this iconic piece of animation software called Flipnote Studio. It was honestly just like so innovative. Um, I switched on my old DS a couple nights ago, and I lost it when I saw these, but it's great to kind of see where I began, just kind of doing whatever, lots of, again, anime inspiration, Pokemon. I'm in high school. I kept art as a hobby, but looked for something that I felt could incorporate my skills into something highly practical. So I had this old dream about becoming an architect. I was taking drafting and CAD classes, learning to make floor plans and using CNC machines. It was all very fascinating on its own. But along the way, one of these new classes offered instruction using Blender, which is a free CG software that helped me like really feel creative again. I was modeling like basic characters, which actually inspired me to get back into art on paper. Um, I was in art classes all through high school, like submitting pieces to small galleries in the city. At this point, I realized there were other options for me, and I actually really wanted to go to school for CG animation. The first problem was, like Kalina, I lived in the Midwest, and shout out to Middle America. It has its charm, but I felt my options were pretty limited at the time when most of the entertainment hotspots and schools are like on the coast, as everyone knows, right? Um, a lot of my younger years were spent in Southern Illinois, right outside of St. Louis, Missouri. And I was accepted into SCAD in Georgia, but the cost was just not ideal for me and my family. So without many options for like accredited art or animation schools nearby, I had to really look closer and figure something out. I sort of had to ask myself, is there a way I can learn the appropriate skills that could land me a job while not compromising my passion for art? But also, what could I compromise if I also just needed to afford school? So I decided to take a huge step and go to school literally just the state over. Yeah, West Lafayette was a time, but the university I went to, Purdue, actually had a CG animation track for undergrad. It was relatively affordable and accessible for me and my transcript at the time. I'll just slide through some of my old CG work I did in undergrad. I was learning basics in modeling and animation and Maya, doing all the things, UV unwrapping, rigging. I was even doing art direction and art passes for video games because we had it was like a full computer graphics department, and video game design was one of those, and we collaborated a lot together. So it was like very interesting, but most of the people who came out of this whole program ended up as CG generalists or technical directors. There was a point when I was learning to do full animatics and character designs for these projects when I realized again that I just wanted to draw. So I wanted to create characters that like reminded me of the joy I felt watching those cartoons and animated movies and anime. So that's what I did. my junior year, I took classes that focused on building a portfolio for anything that we wanted to do. So I focused mine on biz dev and character design. I was drawing on my own time outside of class and doing research on the principles of this whole realm. I was fascinated by like the hero's journey, but with a twist. And this guy was sort of a mini project for that. At the same time, I was still trying to apply what I was learning while working in 3D to my journey as a designer. The image on the right is from a very short class I took on spatial visualization and how to accurately turn objects in your head and think more volumetrically. It was kind of fun, actually. And this is just some more old design work, learning things like line of action and silhouette. This is when a lot of the self-learning came into play since there were no classes that specifically focused on character design in my program. This was like a whole story I boarded with a whole animatic about a guy who gets wine drunk at a house party. There was a point at which I was just like really trying to hit for something comedic and slapstick in my art, but you know, you move on. In drawing from life too, I would encourage anyone who might go the self-teaching route to refer to fundamentals like in life drawing, learning gesture and anatomy. Because where I was, there wasn't really any life drawing events I could attend. So I would go on YouTube and just search for time gesture drawing videos. I would also just go sit outside on campus and people watch and sketch like a normal person. But um, I was also looking to experts and longtime artists in the industry for insight and more like theoretical concepts. I would read blogs and posts from other designers and try to find relevant books. Composing pictures is great for one. If you want to like merge design and composition, I recommend finding like an online directory or virtual library for some of the harder ones to find, but there are plenty of resources online from other artists who are just willing to share their insights. During summers, I would open commission slots on my Instagram, but I had no idea how to price myself, so I wasn't making much up of this. But it did help me learn to work with clients and put my name out there. It helped me build my page. So it's lots of portraits and superheroes and D&D characters. Be fun. So by this point, I had all of these things going for me, but one of the things that was really crucial to my growth and career path was finding and engaging in community. Yay. That's all the artists. Instagram played a big factor in getting work out in the world, and Discord was also great for sharing resources and just getting to know other artists, speaking with people. Uh, I was also in a campus organization called Computational Art Circle that held talks every week on different creative topics. A bigger part of my journey was sort of finding my voice and building a portfolio that felt specific to me and my background. I was playing with, subject and line and composition, trying to find a rhythm that felt like real and organic and something that meant I had a story to tell. I find the most memorable portfolios I see are not just the ones that show the skill or the assignment, but also show that, the artist is bringing their perspective to the table and it says something about who they are and what they value. So I was really trying to hit on all of those things personally. So I just finished my junior year of college when that summer I was contacted by Disney TV and met with art director Eastwood Wong for the potential to work as a color designer on a new show. And now at this point, I felt like all of my sharing, design work, and networking was actually sort of getting some traction. Well, I interviewed and the team was really looking for someone available full time, and I was still a full-time student with a year left before graduation, so I just wasn't a match. But I feel like no more than a week later, I would be contacted by a recruiter at Netflix Animation to help on a film in early production called The Witch Boy. So things were looking up, and when I got it, I quickly left my job washing dishes at the dining courts. Um, the team was honestly amazing, and they worked with me to create a part-time position as a character designer that I could take on while I was finishing my college career. I went full-time remotely after graduating, and it was really an incredible 2 year experience where I learned so much at my first job in the industry. Like I want to emphasize that much of my learning was done on the job, especially those first couple of months, because that was essentially my internship. And I was doing everything hands-on. So I'm super grateful that I was in that position working with folks who just really want to see what I could make. And I know that doesn't happen often, so it was pretty great. Unfortunately, the project I was working on had its production halted and it never saw the light of day. But while it was my first industry job and it was exciting, it was also my first time learning to be prepared for how volatile and uncertain it could be. So still working on that first film credit, fingers crossed. Um, but at the same time, I found that because nothing lasts, at the end of anything good, there is something that will come along and it will be your next challenge and or opportunity. So while still at home, I was contacted again by a studio and its directors, um, same directors that Victor was talking about, Victor Maldonado. They reached out to me to potentially join the team. And shout out to Annwhitney, by the way, for connecting with a young, wide-eyed artist 2,000 miles away. It's great. But because of that, I would eventually branch out and officially break into the industry. As I weighed my way physically to this new job in Los Angeles and also joined the Animation Guild as well. And this is where we are now. I've been at Skydance Animation for about 3 years now, and I've gotten to know some of the coolest folks out here and work with many of the best. Got to meet some of them. Um, Sort of reflecting now in the present, for me, design is a role where I'm constantly learning and shifting. Every project had its own needs, but at the end of the day, there is a tried and true process at its core that I just have to find. And as with any work, it's about learning to enjoy that process. And I just do that by embracing why I started drawing in the first place and along with everything else I shared. So that's me. Thank you for listening, everyone. Appreciate it.
You're amazing. Oh my gosh. Um, cool. So I think we're gonna do like a little panel discussion. We have about 40 minutes left total. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there any topics we want to discuss or more?
I think they have some questions that they're going to ask us.
Okay, cool.
Hello.
Uh,
I don't think we
yeah.
can hear you.
Oh, can you hear
There
me
we go.
now?
Now we
Yep.
can. Yeah.
Ah, she figured it out. That was so incredible to learn about each of your journeys. And I think a huge takeaway for me is just there is no one path. You just continue to improve and meet people and do good work and things happen. So to kind of be open to what's next. So thank you for that. Yeah, this was so great. You've covered so much. About why you wanted to pursue animation and what your path looked like, and each really shared challenges, which was really helpful. Um, was there anything surprising about working in animation, um, that you might advise someone who's just looking into it to just be aware of?
I've hit on it a little bit, but honestly, just kind of being prepared for how quickly things can change. And it is very volatile. Things can sort of hit the fan suddenly. And a lot of that is sometimes just out of your control. Things come from higher up or the structure of a studio or a company is at play there. But for me, that was certainly one of the largest things because everything else kind of fell into place in terms of um, the overall workflow and the pipeline, because so much of that I did learn in school, which was great, just being able to work collaboratively. So I don't know, anyone else?
Yeah, I think like going off of what Devon said, I think something you don't really think about is being your own manager. Because even when you have that studio gig, like everyone, I've only worked at one studio, but everyone else here has kind of jumped around, it sounds like. So I'm always kind of prepping for that rainy day, right? Saving money, always kind of like trying to keep myself updated with my skills. And then even when you're at the studio, we all get at the end of a project, we have our talent development department and they cast us. And it's always kind of thinking ahead too, like what else is in the pipeline? Is there something that matches what I'm doing? Would I be a good fit for certain people at the studio to work with, whether it's like your director, your head of story, whether it's another art director? And it's like important to build those genuine connections. So it's almost like you have to, even when you're at the studio, if you're not freelance, like you're like, I am my own manager. What do I need to do next? What do I have to keep track of?
Like I was also surprised just how close I would become with the people around me. I think coming from where I came from, um, I wasn't used to like making really tight knit connections just from like working on projects. Like from school, it was very much we just have to get this done. Everybody has their own role, push it forward. But especially working at Skydance is when I moved to LA and started working with people in person. Um, that sense of community was a lot stronger than I'd ever anticipated. And even across disciplines, I think most of my friends are story artists, and we don't often like do the same things during the day, but we always come together anyways. And it's a pleasant surprise for sure.
Going off of that, the building the community when you're in person, but in my case, like practically half of my career was remote, and I got very lucky, I think, because my team, they were, even if I'm far away and like in a different time zone, they will always make sure to include me in things. Like it's sometimes at a very bad time, when I worked in for the studio Locksmith in London, they would have the happy hour, and for me it was like 1 p.m. and they were drinking. They're like, Victor, you stop working right now and grab a beer. And I'm like, okay, no, I'm here alone drinking beer in front of the computer. But it was nice to just to build these relationships that again in the future will can bring you so many good things. Like most of these people that I worked with became like some of my best friends. Yeah, so that's great.
Yeah, bouncing off of that, beyond how community just like all of these people are my closest friends as well, but I also want to say that it's through community that you can learn so much. Because
Mm.
we're all very fortunate at Skydance. There's some people who are industry legends here, and I feel like I learn so much from them, but I also feel like I learn maybe even more just from the peers at the same level. Like even listening to everybody's presentations here that I know that like sometimes when people come into art from different places, it can feel a bit competitive, but this community really are the people that grow, support, that you learn from. And yeah, so I think circles rise together. So even before that you're in the industry, like finding a sense of community and finding those people who you can learn from and motivate you is like really, really important.
That's a great segue into my next question, which is how do you continue to grow creatively?
I think it's always taking on new challenges. Like I mentioned earlier, I know that I would like to be a production designer one day for a feature film. And because I'm a generalist, I have the luxury of when I see an assignment that I'm like, ooh, I might not have done that before, but I think I can do it. And if I have the support of my team, because sometimes it is very like you get the assignment, you need to do it, it needs to get done. Sometimes you can afford the flexibility and like have the opportunity to have that dialogue. And I can say, like, hey, I noticed, there's costumes over there. You need a little bit of help. I do pattern work. Maybe I could try that. And so I'd grow in that way. Um, so I think kind of being vocal in your career and not being as passive can pay off. It is a balance of knowing when and like building that trust. It's not, just demanding for that opportunity. But I think there's like this special sweet spot that like learning from your other peers or from that assignment, like you'll continue to grow. And then I like a lot of us continue to grow by just drawing all together, like cafe sketching. A lot of us take continuing like education classes online. I really love Warrior Art Paint. That's one of my favorite online classes. And then a lot of us also do other like personal projects outside of work and continue to grow.
I would say even if you don't plan on because the usual path it's like you get to your position and then you want to become go into leadership position. But even if your plan is to stay in your current thing, every project is it's so different and they have their own challenges. So it's not like sometimes I feel like we like to pretend that we know there's some kind of formula to making a film, but you kind of it's like you're starting from scratch every time. And again, you can do this for 20 years and it's still like, oh my God, I thought I knew what I was doing until you start this movie. So like actually when you have a new director that you work with, you have to learn and how to deal with that person and understand what they want. And because you're ultimately helping them to achieve this vision. So I'd say like it's going to be challenging no matter what. Sorry, my dog is like here in the background. But yeah.
Yeah.
See, oh, go ahead,
Oh,
Raven.
sorry. Go, Devon.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll make a quick one. For me, it's just um, actually kind of stepping away from things and art for a bit and actually going and like living life.
Oh yeah.
Uh, in industry can be hard to balance work life a lot of times. So when you find that, you kind of have to grab it and go. And for that, that's always really refreshing for me. And then when I go and do my other hobbies or go out in the world, and I actually love meeting new people, and that's kind of a really great thing for me as a character designer. It's like I'm building this bank of people in my head who I can take inspiration from and draw life from. So
Mhm.
definitely just kind of like taking a step back from the work and the screens and going out into the world and taking in other forms of art to be inspired by. That helps me if I feel like I need to like take a next step in my work, like I'm missing something. So that's kind of like a creative growth factor for me.
For sure. I That's such a huge part of like my journey was just trying to like realizing you need to step away too. So important. I think for me, like as a person though, I feel the best when I'm like challenging myself and like I think we all like have this like passion, intense passion for what we want for this job, and that's like what got us here. Um, and I think just keeping the learning going, even in small ways, even though we do have our day jobs, I still try to do like personal sequences on the side just for myself and to elevate my craft. It's just it's all based in like this love for our job and storyboarding and telling stories. So um yeah, I think that just keeping the passion going. You're gonna learn and grow no matter what.
Yeah, going off that, I think not also not being afraid to ask other people for advice. And if you feel that you have something that might be a weak spot, not being afraid to ask for help. You don't always need to show this, like we people understand that everyone has a lot to learn. And I remember when I first started at Skydance, had major imposter syndrome. So I think it really helped me by reaching out to my directors at the time. A lot of people in animation are really friendly, willing to help grow, that like it's okay if you don't know everything. The most important thing is that you care about learning it. And I think just not being afraid to ask for help when you need it, and then also yeah, focusing, not forgetting the things that you love and the reason why you got in this industry, and continuing to grow and learn towards those dreams. Yay.
Oh, that's lovely. There's so much wisdom and nuggets here that I'm very excited. Lots of good quotes here. I'd love to move it over to the Q&A. We have some audience questions, if that's good with everyone. I'd love to jump in. Our first one is from Genevieve, I've had to make a significant career pivot, but now I do not qualify for most internships because I graduated nearly 2 years ago. However, I'm still looking for a way to break in, but I feel like I'm struggling because I can't access those early career opportunities that studios look for as a foundation. What are some recommendations that you might have for someone who's had to pivot significantly after their degree to break in? And what opportunities, aside from internships, are there for later career applicants?
I guess I can kind of speak to this a little bit. I know that for some internships, even though they have a requirement within graduation, I actually know multiple people who've gotten the Pixar character design internship that are outside of the range of their graduation. So there are sometimes exceptions, but also apprentice for apprenticeships, they usually don't want you within a certain amount of graduation. They don't want people who are currently in school. So a lot of the apprenticeship opportunities are meant for people who would be able to start full time. And then outside of that, I was really aiming for an internship when I was trying to break in, and I got rejected from every single internship and apprenticeship I applied to. But I actually got in through applying online. So there actually still is hope for literally just submitting an application, and just like building a network and community throughout the industry. If you're not in California, through Instagram and other ways, just through building that community, there might be a job opportunity that somebody might be able to pass along, or if they know you, they might think of you even outside of just cold applying.
And like Genevieve, I also was 2 years out of school getting my first internship and apprenticeship. So I think it's also keeping an eye out. It's like a full-time job looking for a full-time job, right? The industry's ever changing. There's so many changes just from COVID on that have happened. New studios are constantly popping up, smaller studios pop up. There's a lot of things that come and go. And so I think it's really like just trying your hand, seeing what happens. I think like one of my favorite quotes is closed mouths don't get fed. So if you're not constantly talking about it and trying and just seeing what happens when you reach out or you connect or like applying to a position where you're like maybe I'm outside the bounds a little, you might not get it because of that, but what if you applied and they made that small exception for you? I think if you match the project, there's possibility for it. At the end of the day, the people behind the screens, recruiters, and like the people who are hiring all those ADs, the heads of stories, they're people too. They are looking at these applications as well, and they do know, like there's a person behind your application as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Amazing. I think that's really helpful. Um, our next question is from Megan, who is, first of all, just saying this panel is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing about your pathways into the industry. Um, but Megan is noticing that in a lot of internship applications, especially visual development, there's a demand for 3D modeling skills like knowledge of SketchUp or Blender or Maya to use as a rough layout tool. How important has 3D modeling been in your careers? And for character design and Viz Dev, what design software do you use?
Devon, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, to answer sort of the last question first off, I'm mainly in Photoshop for most of my time. But there have been instances where I do pull up Blender. I have it on my laptop just in case because um, I do get character models sometimes to sort of work on posing and drawovers as well as like expression work. And so that's always very helpful to be able to take those files, bring them into the software, um, and just kind of like navigate it, knowing the interface is probably just as much as you would really kind of need to know, at least in the kind of work that we do. Just so you can easily move things around, turn things, know how the camera works, because sometimes if your perspective is off, or if you're looking for specifically like an orthographic view, you kind of need to know that so that you're not drawing something off of model. Um, but honestly, 3D modeling itself, um, hasn't been super applied in like the traditional sense. I think for me, it is mainly about kind of being able to think volumetrically and sort of being able to turn designs around. That's been really helpful for me in that way.
Yeah, plus one, what Devon said, I primarily work in Photoshop most of the day. I do know how to move around in Maya. I don't like it. Thank God there's people who love being 3D modelers and love doing all of that. And I think I'm kind of fortunate in that I am more 2D based and that there's a lot of artists at Skydance that are biz dev that do have all of that 3D knowledge. So I do think in environment art specifically, it's really being utilized throughout the industry and it's always a plus to have. Navigating in it is always a plus because even if you can't do it, opening that file, like Devon said, maybe you can move it around, screenshot what you need. But I frequently am working over other people's 3D work from like the pre-visualization department. I tend to get some work from them depending on how heavy that kind of goes through your show. I'm working on a show where everything kind of goes to previs and will sometimes come back to me. So I tend to work on a screenshot of 3D that I'm drawing over maybe for the perspective or for like animation placement. But other than that, I'm not really touching too much 3D software.
And even for character design, I will say it's helpful to kind of know the sort of the lingo and at least having an idea of how geometry works, especially if we're dealing with like the face and how design translates into, the facial rig. And when you're getting into animation and expressions, it's helpful to know where like sort of certain pinching happens, just the flow of geometry and all of that. But it's not too in depth, not as much as the actual modelers need to know.
I don't know if people that are interested in story have the same questions about 3D, but I learned a long time ago a little bit because I had also had the same interest as Devon and Kalina into like I want to be interior design, and I started working on 3D Max and SketchUp and stuff like that. And a lot of the people that work in story, they actually use a lot of CG. Sometimes you like I used a few times where you have a tight deadline and you have to make this crazy action scene and you're like, I never drew a boat before in my life and now I have to have the camera going around this thing and I'm like, I'm not learning to draw a boat right now, so I'm just gonna get this boat. CG boat. And then if you know how to use Blender and the all the other stuff is really helpful. I've It's saved my life like a couple of times. And we actually have people in the office that full on storyboard on Blender um, as a team. So they model the like everything, they control the camera and then just draw the characters and then they do the cuts and everything else. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix of everything. It's really helpful.
Great. I'm going to combine two questions. Um, any advice on working with the fear of not being good enough? Or if you've had self-doubt and uncertainty, how did you overcome that? If.
I had a fear of not being good enough for this talk. uh yeah, I would say I don't think it's going away. It's I mean, some people they might look at from the outside, they may look like a like wow, that's such confidence, but you can talk to people that I've seen Brad Bird feeling unsure about stuff in the office, and I'm like, okay, it's okay if we feel bad, and if we feel that imposter syndrome sometimes. So, you in my case, I reach out to my supervisors. I actually did like 2 days ago. I was actually feeling really bad. And I was like struggling with a sequence. And then I messaged my supervisors and then we had this conversation. I was like, hey, I started showing my pitch and I was like, oh, I know it could be better. But I'm really struggling with this and that. And they're like, no, like relax. Like we know you. We've been working with you. We know what to expect. So you sometimes you just need to talk to like the people you trust and be honest of how you're feeling. Like, don't ever. I made the mistake a million times of not speaking about it, and you're just like, oh, I'm just gonna wait, and maybe tomorrow it's gonna be a good drawing day, and I'm gonna feel better, and then you keep like it keeps building up. So you need to reach out right away, I think, and That's at least that's how I do it. Yeah.
For me, I dealt with a lot of things by myself, and that's just kind of like how I grew up and got used to. So, but it was learning to be like more patient, like especially when I first started, and also being like realistic. Like, of course, I'm not gonna draw like these veterans who've been working for like 10, 20 years. Like one of my favorite board artists is Dean Kelly, and I love the way he draws and like executes the boards. They're just gorgeous. And then I look at my drawings, but of course, I'm not going to be able to match that because I haven't had that experience yet. So it's kind of like being kind with myself and understanding like I might get there eventually or like towards that a version of myself in 10 years that's going to be really amazing. But it's that kind of helps those thoughts a little bit, at least just being a bit more rational about where I am. And everyone else also knows that too. So yeah.
Yeah, jumping off that, I still have major imposter syndrome all the time. But I feel like I like Victor, like I've reached out to my head of story about it in the past, my supervisor, and I've started to realize that a lot of people who are much more experienced than I do have just as much imposter syndrome. And I think, like, echoing what Raven said about just being patient with yourself, and then also realizing that just because you might not draw as well as some other artists that you admire, who's like the dream artist, that doesn't mean that you don't have something incredibly valuable that's very specific to you that you bring to the table that maybe that artist doesn't. And we all are really hardworking people. We're all going to try our best to improve, but being patient and kind, and also remembering that if you are there, there is something specific that people see in you that you can bring, and that in itself also is something invaluable.
You're there for a
Mhm.
reason.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was my thing. Like you guys already hit on that. So we all deal with it's like the curse we bear as artists, but just kind of remembering that like yeah, people want you in the spot. They know you like Victor said. So
Um,
um
I never
just kind
forgot.
of
Sorry to interrupt you.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, it was just we were in this meeting and our director at the time, Brett Burt, was trying to calm everyone down. We are like, "Hey, you're all here for a reason. We picked you. We trust you. Like if you're here because we like your work, so you need to be like you just need to calm down and and keep going." Yeah.
And animation is like a team effort. That's kind of like when you feel like you can't do something, because you'll get an assignment where you're like, I don't know if I could do this. This is really hard. It's really difficult. And you might have been on this run of like a high of like, I know what I'm doing. I feel confident. I go to work every day. I've got my little schedule. I know how to like divvy up my time. And you get that one assignment that might be like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for this to be over. And it's always the assignment that drags on for 3 weeks to a month or longer or comes back to haunt you. And you might feel like, man, am I not cut out? Because like I was in a really good groove and now I'm just in this space of like, am I good enough to be here? And I think it's remembering like what everyone else has said. You can reach out laterally, you can reach out to your leadership and have that very real conversation of like, hey, this is where I'm struggling. I need pointers. And remembering that like you're there because you're special, because you fill one part. Everyone else is hired because you always have someone that kind of is like across the spectrum from you and like does that thing that you don't do well. That's their thing, and vice versa. So they might be feeling imposter syndrome and where you shine.
I think that's such a great point. You don't have to be a 10 out of 10 in every single thing. There's they're hiring to balance that to get everything that they need. So yeah, you can shine. Amazing. Um, we are getting close to time. There are so many amazing questions. Thank you to all the attendees for putting in such amazing questions in the Q&A. I'm going to kind of group some of them together. One is about networking with directors, producers, recruiters, not just for short term, but long term, and also just relationship building with networking. So I think that's really just about relationships and how to nurture them throughout your career.
I guess I can start because I feel like for the later half of my career, I feel like I built a pretty good relationship with a lot of people, but it was never, honestly, everything was very natural. Like again, because I use my supervisors, like my heads of stories, like it's really a support for me when I'm working. I tend to get like, I mean, I'm usually very vulnerable, like to them, like quite easily. I don't know how many times I cried to supervisors because we were like we start talking about things and again like when I try to bring personal things into the stories I'm helping to tell. And I think when you're vulnerable with you like your coworkers and you end up creating these relationships. And for me, that was kind of the case. And then on top of that, it's just keep going with your good work. People remember everything, the good and the bad. Um, and they uh and it's like when you find a good team it's like you're always chasing that high again like oh my God, yeah, I had this amazing experience with this group of people. I kind of want to have that again. It doesn't always work if you just keep getting the same people over and over. It's a completely different project. It doesn't always work, but it certainly helped to and then just trying to keep it in touch, but in a natural way. Like I just love the people I work with. I hang out with them because I love them, and it's not like, oh, I need to keep in touch with this person. I get a job. Like, no, it's just I really enjoyed, working with them, and then things can come kind of naturally. I believe, at least for me, it worked. But
Um, I'm looking at my slides when I was like talking about this, and I didn't have time to go over them. But so yeah, because like I think I was building my community over the during the pandemic, and everyone was remote. But I think Devon can like relate to this too. You were still able to like find people to connect with. Um, I would find people like artists on a similar level as me, like in terms of skill, and I would connect with them. There's also like classes you can take and build community that way, and then maybe even talk with like the teacher outside of class. And then my big thing that made a difference for me was like conventions and just kind of like how I act at conventions. I loved it because it was so cool for me to come from like a small town into like the big city, and like all these artists from all over the world came together and we all love and like kind of think the same way. Um, just film. And so it was easy for me to like talk with people because I knew that they felt the same way I did. Um, so just kind of like being open at conventions. And then the last thing is just like organizations. There was a lot that popped up over the pandemic. Um, Rise Up Animation isn't a thing anymore, but yeah, I think we mentioned a few of them in our talks, but like women in animation and Black and animated, Latinx. So those were all that together. I was slowly able to like build a community that kind of grew out and out. And that was helpful.
Yeah, and
In
our
terms of like, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to cover the in studio because I feel like everyone else covered like outside of studio really well too, and like parts of in studio being remote. I think in studio too, sometimes it's just asking your like mutual, like, I see Paul Felix sitting over there. Hey, Kelly Hoover, our she works in talent development. I'd be like, can you like introduce us in passing just really quick? And it's like what Victor said, it's not to force anything. It was just to genuinely say like hello and just like have the conversation for a bit. But I think sometimes you'll just find a mutual where you're like, hey, I saw so and so started. Can you just even introduce us? And you can see what happens. It's not always to get a job or to like have your next gig. Sometimes it's just to see what you can learn from another person or make a friend, or you might meet other people that are in a totally different vein, like a totally different group than you that connect you to like a new network.
Yeah, quickly going off that too. Animation people are really friendly, and a lot of us are really willing to help because we were in your shoes before. Where I remember when I was in college, and I went to college on the East Coast, which is pretty far away. Like I would just cold email people, and a lot of people didn't respond to me, but then a lot of people did, and they gave me really valuable advice. And it's not like it led to me getting a job, but it definitely like impacted me as a person. So don't be afraid to reach out to people because a lot of like you can't guarantee everyone will respond, but most people are really friendly and willing to help, give back, and in any way they can.
I would say, especially in the animation community, I've been really surprised, like going to Lightbox and going to these places and being like, wow, like these big artists are like really excited to meet new artists and connect and just passing in the corridors, you know? So I think there is just it's such a lovely group of people. We also, the BRIC Foundation website, bricfoundation.org, we have a whole resources page, which also lists a lot of organizations that help with animators. We have panels from previous summits about portfolio reviews, how to build your portfolio, things like that. So there's a lot of really good resources for networking and for portfolio on our site if you want to check that out. Just a quick plug, because I know there are a lot of questions around that. And then just one quick last question. Once you started working in a studio, what changed most about how you approach your work compared to when you were building your portfolio?
I think
Um,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Devon.
I would just say quickly that one thing a lot of us kind of value now, just as we started working in studios, is being able to just like do the quick sketch and being able to just like
Hmm.
push things out. And for your portfolio, you're refining things. You're really trying to impress recruiters and other artists and things who are really trying to make your stuff pop. But once you start getting into the real like nitty-gritty of it, sometimes it is just about kind of getting things down on the page and doing as many things as you can to show. And you'll find that that's always appreciated anyway. I mean, kind of going back to the imposter syndrome thing, like even if you feel like it's not the best because you spend so much time on pieces that you're putting in your portfolio. So now you get there and you're like, is this okay? Can I just send this forward? You'll find that that's always appreciated because it is such a fast-paced environment a lot of times. So just being like okay with something a bit loose and rough, but you're still applying all of the things that you know. It's just kind of about doing it in a shorthand in a way. So that's been my experience. Maybe some can relate as well.
Yeah, plus what Devon said, it's like I feel like I'm constantly sending off what feels like unfinished work because you're so often told to have the finished piece. It's kind of like the end of stages of an animation production or like these really beautiful early paintings. And if that's not your thing, you can feel like, man, like now I'm sending off, it's not quite scribbles, they're tied down sketches or whatever, but it definitely feels like you're like, ooh, is this good enough? And then I think the other part of the imposter syndrome and like what changed for me starting to work was like, man, I make money from this now. And sometimes it helps where I'm like, I just have to do the assignment because I'm getting paid to do it. So I just have to sit down and figure it out. And it makes the imposter syndrome go away. And sometimes it makes me be kind of lean the other way where I'm like, man, I make money from this. Maybe it should be more beautiful, more finished. It should look more like my colleagues' work. So I think there's always this ebb and flow from when you start depending on your mindset of like how your work will kind of shift in studio and then versus like what you see happens in your personal work outside of the studio.
Yeah, I think from the storyboard side too, since we're very much in it with the director and we're kind of part of the writing, like it can be very easy to get emotionally attached to the story. And a lot of times in feature, we'll board multiple versions of the movie that will then get thrown out and never see the light of day. So I think it's just important to remember that once you're on the job, you're using your voice to serve the vision of the director. And it's no longer about like, this is exactly what represents me, but more of like, how can I use my unique voice to service the greater vision? And I think like having a little bit of trying with all your might to be the best artist you can be, but also being able to detach to knowing that just because your sequence doesn't make it into the film, that's not a representation of you as an artist. That's just the role of the job. So being able to kind of differentiate those two paths.
It almost sounds like when you're doing your portfolio, you can be very, very precious. And then once you get into a working environment, you kind of have to loosen that up a little bit because especially if you've been in any other side of the pipeline, you see why things change and you really understand how not personal it is, but it can feel like it is. So I really appreciate Shelby bringing that up. I just want to thank everyone so much for joining this panel. I am so grateful for these artists' time. This was so informative for me, and I know everyone here in the chat is just over the moon. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Every attendee here, we still have a few more sessions. If you'd like to join us for our 3 o'clock sessions, please pop over. And thank you all so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.